Today I will discuss a publishing partnership between OSU Libraries and Calyx Press. As you know, my name's Jane Nichols. I'm a librarian at Oregon State University, and not able to join me are my colleagues Alicia Bublitz, director of the press, and Corey Jackson, also from OSU. We three joined to respond to a Carnegie Mellon National Endowment for the Humanities Open Books grant to digitize 26 texts from authors published by Calyx Press. And if for those who are unfamiliar with the press, it's a independent, feminist, and obviously small press, and located in Oregon, in the same town where OSU is. After digitization, the ebooks will be made freely accessible under a Creative Commons license. And I want to talk a little bit about the project, its status, things we've learned along the way, and current thoughts about how we believe it contributes to digital feminist futures and socially engaged humanities. But first, I must pause and call us to order. As with any Calyx meeting, we start with a reading of a poem published by the press. So if you'll indulge me, Alicia, my colleague, suggested this poem, which is entitled, I Listened to Alice Walker on a Pocket Radio by Pauline Peterson, former Poet Laureate of Oregon. Sitting at my desk, I concentrate on a distant voice through static, the radio pressed to my ear, antenna full length. I hear Alice Walker tell about earthquakes, her mama's roots and seeds, aunts who shed their weekday uniforms for Saturday's perfume and furs, turning right before her girl eyes into fragrant, velvety blossoms. I press the small speaker closer to hear her voice tell how we all require the wonder of transformations, and a black, silver-stemmed flower unfolds at my ear. Another tradition I want to share with you is that, sorry, a little bit ahead of myself, is that of the green suitcase. Our slide includes this image of a green suitcase that has been with Calyx for decades, carrying their books and journals by the press founders, directors, editors, and volunteers to conferences, readings, and other venues to share and promote the press and its publications. It has survived many eventful travels, the ups and downs common to publishing, as well as transformations in the publishing marketplace. The current staff continue to bring it with them to events to this day, just as I bring it here, though virtually. Calyx's co-founders started the press to make women's creative writing, poetry, and prose visible, heard, and published. Calyx joined many other independent presses founded around the same time with this same express mission of publishing literature and art created by and for women in the second half of the 20th century. Transformations such as the broad availability of computers and the internet, along with changes in publishing, caused many independent presses to close or be merged into larger organizations. While some of the more widely known texts, such as this bridge called My Back, writings by radical women of color, which our keynote mentioned yesterday, have been able to remain in print, even though it has had time periods where it was out of print, or are being reprinted now. However, many of the smaller works have been left without a platform. Thus, when the grant opened, we saw this as a way to partner to make Calyx's works available. The grant was primarily focused on supporting publishers of scholarly monographs, typically those from university presses, who wanted to digitize their backlist and would agree to make their titles openly available as ebooks. Our project, however, focused on the cultural heritage of 20-some out-of-print Calyx titles, a mix of poetry and prose, anthologies, novels, and collections of poems spanning 3 decades. We saw our project as a way for OSU libraries to explore what the library's scope of digital publishing services could be, which we know is a newer arena for academic libraries. And this presented a way to do so that aligned with both our institution's land-grant mission and the library's many values, which include access, collaboration, diversity, innovation, and preservation. Calyx saw this as a way to preserve their titles and make them readily available in ebook formats, and to introduce the titles and the press to a new audience while reinvigorating its long-standing readership. In essence, this is one way for the press to say we're still standing after 40 years of existence. And as a volunteer with the press, I can tell you it's quite formidable to still be standing there. And these are some examples of the press titles that we intend to digitize. And we have started with these 4 texts, and I present a few comments about them. We chose these titles knowing that we would be able to reach the authors, a very practical point, and they would be likely to agree to the project. It has been somewhat challenging to reach some of the other authors, either because they're older and focusing on health concerns. They may not respond to email, maybe they don't use email, or for others it means working through their estates. Maybe the person has passed on. Unfortunately, this has slowed our progress. However, we're buoyed by our participating authors' enthusiasm, their encouragement, and support for the project, and so we continue to reach out to the remaining authors. Because the project relies on the strengths of each partner, the library is contributing labor on managing the grant and the project overall. We take the lead on partnering with Biblio Evolve, the organization doing the digitization and distribution. We will continue to cover the cost of paying Biblio Evolve to store the digitized files for some years going forward. We also plan to store copies of the files in our institutional repository. And we plan to have files distributed to the locations that you see, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc. In terms of the texts themselves, the only changes have been to the copyright page to reflect the grant support and the Creative Commons license. We collaborated on those revisions. Calyx is taking the lead on connecting with authors, which makes sense given their long-standing relationship. We're almost ready to feature the works on our respective websites. Biblio Evolve is working on inserting the updated copyright pages into the EPUB files, and once that is complete, we'll be able to post them to both the Calyx website and the library website. I can say it's been awfully fun to read the files using iBooks on my computer. I have them stored locally, and this is what it looks like. I, of course, love the color. And you can get a sense of an ebook. It's just like any other ebook that you've read, where the titles of the individual contents are hyperlinked, and then you can go forward to access the content itself. And so I want to turn to some of the issues that we've come across as we've gone through this work. In addition to some of the challenges I've already mentioned in reaching authors and getting our workflow going, we've tussled with problematic questions of ownership. One challenge we came up against was how to align ourselves with 2 socio-political concerns, open access and feminism, each having their own notions of women's labor. As we know, women's rights movements have long condemned the fact that women's labor was and still is largely invisible socially, politically, and economically. As early as 1920, the year women won the right to vote in the U.S., the movement was pressing for recognition of a motherhood endowment, a way of signaling and providing financial support for politically disappeared work of raising a family and keeping a home. With this history in mind, we were uncomfortable asking women authors to offer their works for free through open access. While open access offers many benefits, its primary aim has not been on valuing labor. Open access as a movement is concerned with the ways that faculty work has been exploited by the academic publishing industry. And some open access publishers have try to counter this by experimenting with paying writers and peer reviewers. However, the larger problem of uncompensated labor within academic publishing, even though it's in the service of access to knowledge, is unresolved and is an ongoing dilemma. So when we were asking Calyx authors to allow their work to be free to own and read, we faced this uncomfortable reality that we could be echoing a history of exploitation where free could also mean unacknowledged and unsupported. Ultimately, we decided to do what we could by including a stipend for each author in the grant budget itself as a way of acknowledging the continued value of their works, even while making them freely available in the marketplace. Bell Hooks, again, to the rescue. As she writes, feminist writing that is inaccessible to the public is depoliticized and de-radicalized. Revolutionary feminism demands a revolution of access, thus giving greater weight to our intention to provide long-term access by storing copies in our repository. Our project aligns with, and I believe is situated in, similar efforts. Florence Howe of the Feminist Press writes in her 2014 article titled Lost and Found and What Happened Next, some reflections on the search for women writers begun by the Feminist Press in 1970. She outlines why and how the press began and why it focused on resurfacing and reprinting books authored by women from around the world. Examples of such titles include The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman and I Love Myself When I'm Laughing, and Then Again When I'm Looking Mean and Indifferent by Zora Neale Hurston. Howe closes by asking us, what do the terms lost and found come to mean? How does a work become lost? What is the process? Should we be concerned if an author begins to fade away? Before I depart from the Feminist Press, I do want to encourage everyone to check them out. They have what looks to be an amazing new slate of staff led by Jamia Wilson. Another effort to make feminist works revisible is the digitization of the feminist second wave UK magazine Spare Rib by the British Library and JISC, which, if you're unfamiliar with them, it's a nonprofit supporting digital technologies in research and education. Just as the Feminist Press aimed to reprint women authors and find new audiences by digitizing feminist publications like these, we see the potential to attract new and returning generations of readers. So in closing, I want to try and weave together a few thoughts. We're not blinded by technolust as we go forward in our project. We realize it's an experiment. In 2004, Simone Murray rightly points our collective attention for the preservation of women's writings on intellectual property, reconceptualizing books not as standalone entities, but as component products in the life of a larger content property may offer feminist publishing its best chance of survival in a greatly expanded and increasingly converged media landscape. And by media, she intends multimedia. Doing so is a contemporary example of Virginia Woolf's assertion that owning a printing press is the non-negotiable prerequisite for guaranteeing intellectual liberty. Murray concludes control of the medium is proving secondary to control of the message itself. Despite making their content openly available, Calyx authors retain control over their messages and their intellectual property rights. Thus, they align with Robin Morgan's 1970 declaration, "This book is an action." We see that through the act of publication itself. We believe that by making these works available, making them available openly, we align ourselves with our feminist four sisters who were contributing to the movement through the very act of producing these works and thereby contributing to today's digital feminist movement. So thank you very much.